My parents gave my twin brother $2 million for his dream wedding and called me the family disappointment, before throwing me out on my 25th birthday with nothing but a trash bag of clothes. I lived in my car for months while they bragged about his perfect life to everyone 10 years later when his marriage collapsed and his business failed. They discovered I had quietly built a billion-dollar tech empire and owned the building where he worked. When they showed up at my penthouse begging for the failure to save their golden boy, what I said left them completely speechless and changed everything forever. The morning of my 25th birthday started like every other morning in the Harrison household. My mother, Victoria Harrison, was in the kitchen preparing an elaborate breakfast spread. The smell of fresh croissants, imported coffee, and expensive Belgian chocolate filled the air. Crystal vases held freshly cut flowers on every surface. The dining room looked like something out of an interior design magazine. But none of it was for me. My name is Sophia Harrison, and I learned very early in life that my existence was, at best, an afterthought. My twin brother, Sebastian, was born exactly 7 minutes before me, and those 7 minutes had somehow determined the trajectory of our entire lives. He came first. He would always come first. I sat at the far end of the breakfast table that morning, watching as my mother fussed over Sebastian's plate. She'd made his favorite, eggs Benedict with truffle oil, fresh fruit arranged in a perfect spiral, and a mimosa in a crystal flute. "Sebastian, darling, you need to eat more," she cooed, placing another croissant on his already overflowing plate. "You've been so stressed with the wedding planning. We can't have you looking gaunt in the photos." Sebastian smiled that perfect practice smile that had charmed everyone from our kindergarten teachers to Harvard admission officers. "Thanks, Mom. You always know exactly what I need." I glanced down at my own plate, a single piece of toast that I'd made myself, already cold. There was no mimosa for me, no perfectly arranged fruit, no truffle oil anything. There never was. My father, Richard Harrison, walked into the dining room wearing his signature navy blue suit and gold cufflinks that had been in the family for generations. He was the CEO of Harrison Financial Group, a multi-billion-dollar investment firm that his great-grandfather had started during the Great Depression. The Harrison name was synonymous with old money, prestige, and power in this city. "Good morning, son," he said, clapping Sebastian on the shoulder before taking his seat at the head of the table. His eyes swept past me like I was part of the furniture. "Are we all set for tonight?" Tonight, the engagement party for Sebastian and his fiancée, Arabella Worthington. The Worthingtons were another old money family, their fortune built on shipping and real estate. The union of Sebastian Harrison and Arabella Worthington was being treated like a royal wedding. Every society page had covered the announcement. Every influential family in the state had been invited to tonight's celebration. "Everything is perfect, Dad," Sebastian said. "The ballroom at the Grand Marquis is transformed. Arabella's been working with the event planner for months. It's going to be the social event of the decade." My mother beamed. "Of course it will be. Nothing but the best for our Sebastian." I cleared my throat quietly. I was thinking I could help with something tonight. Setting up, greeting guests, anything really. I'd like to contribute. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's smile tightened. My father didn't even look up from his newspaper. Sebastian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Sophia," my mother finally said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of condescension I'd grown so familiar with, "I don't think that would be appropriate. This is a very important event. We need people who can represent the family well." The implication hung in the air like poison. I wasn't pretty enough, I wasn't polished enough, I wasn't Harrison enough. "I am family," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. My father finally looked up. His eyes were cold, calculating, the same look he gave underperforming investments before cutting them loose. "Sophia, we've discussed this. You're 25 years old today. It's time we had a serious conversation about your future." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. Sebastian suddenly became very interested in his eggs Benedict. My mother set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "What kind of conversation?" I asked, though part of me already knew. My father folded his newspaper and set it aside. "You've been living in this house, enjoying all the privileges of the Harrison name for 25 years. In that time, Sebastian has graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, joined the family firm, and is now engaged to one of the finest young women in the country. And you?" He paused, letting the question hang. "I'm working," I said, my voice stronger now. "I have a job at the bookstore downtown. I'm saving money. I've been taking online courses in computer programming." My mother laughed, actually laughed. A bookstore, Sophia. Computer programming. These are hobbies for teenagers, not career paths for a Harrison. It's not a hobby. I'm learning to code. I want to build something of my own. Build what? My father's voice cut through like a blade. You have no business degree, no connections, no capital. You're living in a fantasy world while your brother is building real success in the real world. Because you gave him everything. The words exploded out of me before I could stop them. You paid for his education, his apartment, his car, his designer clothes. You gave him a position at the company. You introduced him to every influential person you know. What did you ever give me? The silence that followed was different now, charged, dangerous. My father stood slowly. What did we give you? We gave you a roof over your head for 25 years. We gave you food, clothing, opportunities you clearly never appreciated. We gave you the Harrison name, which apparently means nothing to you. The Harrison name has never meant anything to me because you never let me be part of it. I was standing now too, my hands shaking. Every school event, every family dinner, every holiday, it was always about Sebastian. Sebastian's achievements, Sebastian's future, Sebastian's happiness. I was just the inconvenient twin who happened to exist. My mother stood up, her face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to your father that way, after everything we've sacrificed for this family? What have you sacrificed for me? Name one thing. That's enough, my father's voice boomed through the dining room. I've had enough of your ingratitude, Sophia. Your mother and I have discussed this, and we've made a decision. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. What is this? I asked, though my hands were trembling too much to pick it up. It's a check for $5,000, he said coldly. Consider it a birthday gift and a severance package. You have until the end of the day to pack your things and leave this house. The words didn't register at first. They couldn't be real. You're kicking me out. We're setting you free, my mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You've made it very clear that you don't appreciate what we've provided, so now you can go out into the world and build whatever it is you think you can build. Prove us wrong, Sophia. We'll be watching. I looked at Sebastian, desperate for some sign of support, some indication that he would stand up for me. We were twins. We had shared a womb, a birthday, a childhood. Didn't that mean anything? But Sebastian just stared at his plate, pushing eggs around with his fork. Sebastian, I said, my voice cracking, say something. He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes broke something inside me. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was worse. It was indifference. Maybe this will be good for you, Soph, he said quietly. Maybe you need to figure things out on your own for a while. I stared at him for a long moment, then at my mother, then at my father. These people were supposed to be my family. They were supposed to love me unconditionally. Instead, they were throwing me away like garbage on my 25th birthday. Fine, I said, my voice suddenly steady. Something shifted inside me in that moment, a wall going up, a door closing. I'll leave, but don't expect me to come crawling back. My father's laugh was cold and dismissive. Sophia, let's be realistic. You'll be back within a month, begging for help. You have no skills, no experience, no connections. The world is going to eat you alive. And when you come back, my mother added, there will be conditions. You'll need to show us that you've changed, that you're ready to be a real member of this family. I picked up the envelope and turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. I looked back at the three of them, my father already returning to his newspaper, my mother refilling Sebastian's coffee, my brother checking his phone, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Clarity. You know what's funny? I said quietly. I spent my entire life trying to earn your love, trying to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough. But the truth is, it was never about what I did or didn't do. You decided who I was before I ever had a chance to show you who I could be. My mother rolled her eyes. Spare us the dramatics, Sophia. I'm not being dramatic, I'm being honest, maybe for the first time in my life. I straightened my shoulders. But here's what I want you to remember. This moment right now, when you chose to throw me away. Remember how certain you were that I was nothing. Remember how sure you were that I would fail. My father finally looked up, something flickering in his eyes that might have been curiosity or might have been amusement. Is that a threat, Sophia? No, I said simply. It's a promise. Then I turned and walked out of the dining room, up the grand staircase, and into my small bedroom at the end of the hall, the smallest room in the house, the one they'd given me when Sebastian decided he wanted my original room for his gaming setup when we were 12. I looked around at the space that had been mine for over a decade, the second-hand furniture my parents had reluctantly provided, the the walls I'd painted myself when they refused to hire decorators for my room like they had for Sebastian's, the bookshelf overflowing with novels I'd bought with my own money from the bookstore's employee discount. This was it, 25 years, and this was all I had to show for it. I found a trash bag in the hall closet. They hadn't even offered me a suitcase, and began stuffing my clothes inside. I grabbed my laptop, my phone charger, a few photos of my grandmother, the only person in this family who had ever truly loved me, before she died when I was 16, and the small emergency fund I'd hidden in a sock drawer, $347 in crumpled bills and loose change. Combined with the $5,000 check, I had $5,347 to start my entire life over. I carried my trash bag downstairs, past the dining room where my family was now laughing about something, probably the engagement party, probably Sebastian's glowing future, and out the front door of the house I'd grown up in. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt final, permanent. I stood on the front steps for a moment, blinking in the morning sunlight. It was a beautiful day, actually. Clear blue sky, gentle breeze, birds singing in the perfectly manicured trees, the kind of day that felt like it should mean something good. Instead, I was homeless, jobless. I would have to quit the bookstore, since it was across town and I had no way to get there anymore, and completely alone. I walked down the long driveway toward the street, my trash bag slung over my shoulder, and didn't look back, not once. The first few days were a blur. I used some of my money to rent a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city. It smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke, and I could hear every argument and television show from the rooms on either side, but it was shelter. It was safety. I spent those first days in a kind of shock, lying on the lumpy mattress and staring at the water-stained ceiling, trying to process what had happened. Every few hours, I would pick up my phone, sure that there would be a message from my parents, an apology, a "we didn't mean it," a "please come home." But the only messages I received were from Sebastian's wedding planning group chat, which I was still inexplicably a part of. Updates about flower arrangements and seating charts for an event I was no longer welcome to attend. On the third day, I finally forced myself to get up. I showered in the moldy bathroom, put on my cleanest clothes, and walked to the nearest library. I needed to make a plan. I needed to figure out what came next. The library became my refuge over the following weeks. I spent hours there every day, using their free internet to search for jobs, apartments, anything that could help me build some kind of life. I applied for positions I was qualified for, positions I was overqualified for, and positions I had no business applying for at all. I searched for rooms to rent, studios, shared housing, anything cheaper than the motel that was slowly draining my savings. But every application seemed to hit a wall. Without references, without a permanent address, without a college degree, my parents had refused to pay for my education, claiming I wasn't university material. I was invisible, worthless, exactly what they'd always told me I was. After 2 weeks, my money was running out. The motel cost $45 a night, and even eating nothing but ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, I was burning through my savings at an alarming rate. I had to make a choice. I found a used car lot on the edge of town, the kind that sold vehicles other dealerships had given up on. Dented, rusted, barely functional machines that came with no guarantees and even fewer expectations. I bought a 1999 Honda Civic for $700 cash. It had over 200,000 miles on it, a mysterious rattle that got worse whenever I turned left, and a back seat that smelled permanently of wet dog, but it ran, mostly. And more importantly, it was shelter. I moved out of the motel that same day and into my car. The first night sleeping in the Honda was the hardest. I'd parked at a rest stop just off the highway, surrounded by truckers and travelers who didn't give me a second glance. I curled up in the back seat with a thin blanket I'd bought at a thrift store, my trash bag of possessions wedged against the door, and tried to convince myself that this was temporary. This was just a rough patch. This was building character. But at 2 a.m, when the cold seeped through the windows and every noise outside made me flinch, I couldn't stop the tears anymore. I cried for hours, silently, my face pressed against the musty fabric of the seat, grieving the life I'd thought I would have, the family I'd thought I belonged to, the person I'd thought I was. I cried until there was nothing left. And then somehow I slept. The weeks that followed taught me more about survival than 25 years of privileged, if emotionally neglected, existence ever had. I discovered that some gyms offered free 7-day trial memberships, which meant I could shower and have access to a bathroom for a week at a time before moving to the next gym. I learned which parking lots were safe to sleep in, truck stops, hospital parking garages, Walmart lots that allowed overnight parking, and which would get you woken up by a police officer tapping on your window at 3 a.m. I found out that many libraries let you use their computers and internet without any questions, and that librarians were often the kindest people in the world, looking the other way when a clearly homeless young woman spent 8 hours a day at the same desk. I learned that dollar stores sold surprisingly decent food if you knew what to look for: canned vegetables, peanut butter, bread, crackers. I figured out that public water fountains could fill empty bottles. I discovered that sitting in fast food restaurants nursing a single coffee for hours was acceptable as long as you were quiet and didn't cause trouble. Most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Every morning I woke up in my car, stiff and cold and exhausted, and I thought about giving up. I thought about calling my parents, apologizing for whatever sins they imagined I'd committed, and begging them to take me back. But then I would remember the look on my father's face when he handed me that envelope, the sound of my mother's laugh, the indifference in Sebastian's eyes. And something inside me would harden, some core of steel I hadn't known I possessed. They wanted me to fail. They expected me to fail. They had probably already rehearsed the "I told you so" speech they would give when I came crawling back. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I doubled down. I spent my days at the library, teaching myself everything I could about computer programming, web development, and software engineering. I'd always had a knack for technology. I'd taught myself basic coding in high school, building simple websites for fun, but I'd never had the chance to develop those skills properly. My parents had dismissed my interests as a waste of time, unworthy of a Harrison. Now, with nothing but time and desperation, I threw myself into learning with an intensity I'd never experienced before. I completed online courses, worked through tutorial after tutorial, and built small projects to practice my skills. I created a portfolio website showcasing what I could do, even though what I could do was still pretty basic compared to professional developers. And slowly, tentatively, I started reaching out to potential clients. The freelancing platforms were brutal at first. There were thousands of developers competing for every project, most of them with more experience and lower rates than I could offer. But I was persistent. I bid on every small project I could find, fixing bugs, building simple websites, creating basic apps, always charging less than I should, always delivering more than expected. My first paying client was a small bakery in a town I'd never heard of. The owner wanted a simple website to showcase her products and take online orders. I quoted her $300, half my usual rate, because I desperately needed the work and the reference. I built that website from my car, parked outside a McDonald's that offered free Wi-Fi, my laptop balanced on the steering wheel. It took me 3 days of intense work, and when it was done, I sent it to the client with a prayer. She loved it. "This is exactly what I wanted," she wrote in her email. "Better, actually, you're so talented." I sat in my car, reading those words over and over, and cried for the second time since leaving home. But these were different tears. These were tears of relief, of validation, of hope. Someone thought I was talented. Someone thought my work mattered. Maybe I wasn't the disappointment my family had always told me I was. That first client referred me to her sister, who owned a small boutique. The sister referred me to a friend who ran a local restaurant. Word started spreading slowly, incrementally, that there was a young developer who did quality work for reasonable prices. Within 3 months, I had a steady stream of small clients. Within 6 months, I was making enough to rent a tiny studio apartment. It was barely bigger than a closet, really, a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small you could touch both walls while sitting on the toilet. The building was old, the neighbors were loud, and I could hear mice in the walls at night. But it was mine. I signed that lease with hands that shook from something that might have been fear or might have been joy. I'd done it. I'd survived. I'd built something from nothing, exactly like I'd promised I would. That night I cooked my first real meal in months, pasta with jarred sauce and frozen vegetables, and ate it sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, looking out the window at the city lights below. And for the first time since my 25th birthday, I smiled. Part 2: The Rise. The first year was about survival, learning to code, finding clients, keeping my head above water. The second year was about building. I continued taking on freelance projects, but I also started working on something bigger, an idea that had been growing in the back of my mind for months. I'd noticed that many of my small business clients struggled with the same problems: managing inventory, tracking sales, coordinating with suppliers. They were using scattered spreadsheets, outdated software, or no system at all. What if there was a simple, affordable platform that could handle all of it? I started building it in my tiny studio apartment, working nights and weekends while taking freelance projects during the day. The first version was rough, barely functional, full of bugs, embarrassingly basic compared to enterprise solutions, but I showed it to a few of my existing clients, and their response surprised me. "This is exactly what I need," said Maria, who ran a small clothing store. "Simple, easy to use, affordable. The big software companies charge thousands of dollars for platforms my business can't afford. This could actually work." She became my first beta tester. Then came Jorge, who owned a hardware store. Then Lisa, who ran a local catering company. Word spread through the small business community that there was a young developer building something specifically for them. By the end of year 2, I had 20 paying customers at $50 a month each. $1,000 in monthly recurring revenue wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something real. By year 3, I had 100 customers, $5,000 a month. By year 4, I had to hire my first employee, another developer named Priya, who I'd met through an online forum. She believed in the product enough to take a chance on a tiny startup that operated out of a now slightly larger studio apartment. By year 5, we had 500 customers, 3 employees, and enough revenue to move into a small office space. And by year 6, 6 years after my family threw me away like garbage, Sophia Harrison had quietly built a company worth $8 million. I never forgot where I came from. How could I? Every time I signed a new client, I remembered eating peanut butter crackers in my car. Every time I approved a new hire, I remembered applying for jobs that never called back. Every time I saw our company's revenue grow, I remembered the look on my father's face when he handed me that check and told me I would fail. But I also learned something important during those years. Bitterness is heavy. Carrying it takes energy that could be spent building something better. So I chose to put that bitterness down, not to forgive. I wasn't there yet and might never be, but to stop letting my family's rejection define me. I was more than the disappointment they'd decided I was. I was more than the role they'd forced me into. I was Sophia Harrison, and I was just getting started. During those building years, I deliberately kept a low profile. While other tech founders were giving interviews, posting on social media, and attending conferences, I stayed quiet. I focused on the product, on the customers, on the growth. I didn't want attention. I didn't want recognition. And I definitely didn't want my family to know what I was building. That last part wasn't entirely possible, of course. We lived in the same city, moved in some of the same circles, even if their circles were much more exclusive than mine. Occasionally, I would hear whispers about the Harrisons, updates about Sebastian's career, his marriage to Arabella, his rapid rise through the family company. And they, I was sure, heard whispers about me, or at least they could have if they'd bothered to pay attention. But from what I could tell, they didn't. As far as Richard and Victoria Harrison were concerned, their disappointing daughter had done exactly what they expected, disappeared into irrelevance, too ashamed or too broken to show her face again. Good, let them think that. It made what I was planning even sweeter. The first real test came at the end of year 6. I was in my office, a real office now, with glass walls and modern furniture and a team of 23 employees, when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her expression uncertain. "She says she's your mother." My blood ran cold. "Send her away," I said automatically. "She's very insistent, and she's making a scene in the lobby." Of course she was. Victoria Harrison had never encountered a situation she couldn't control through sheer force of will and social pressure. "Give me 5 minutes, then send her up." I used those 5 minutes to compose myself, to remember who I was now, not who I had been, to remind myself that I had built an empire from nothing while they watched from their gilded tower, waiting for me to fail. When my mother walked into my office, I barely recognized her. It had been 6 years, and those years had not been kind to Victoria Harrison. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was showing gray at the roots. Her face, once smooth and carefully maintained, was lined with wrinkles that no amount of expensive cream could hide. And her clothes, while still expensive, looked somehow dated, like she was dressing for a decade that had already passed. But the thing that struck me most was her eyes. There was a desperation there that I'd never seen before, a hunger. "Sophia," she said, and her voice cracked on my name. "Oh, my darling girl, look at you." I stayed behind my desk, kept my expression neutral. "Mother, what brings you here?" She looked around my office, taking in the modern furniture, the city views, the evidence of success that surrounded us. I watched her face cycle through a series of emotions: surprise, calculation, something that might have been regret. "I had no idea," she said softly. "All this time, I had no idea what you'd built." "You didn't ask." She flinched. I know I should have. We should have." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders and met my eyes. "Sophia, I'm here because I need your help." There it was, the reason for the visit. "Of course you are," I said quietly. "It's not what you think. It's not about money." "Then what is it about?" She hesitated, her composure cracking. "It's Sebastian. He's in trouble, Sophia, the kind of trouble that could destroy him." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. What kind of trouble? "His business, the investment firm. He made some decisions that haven't worked out. And Arabella," her voice broke. "Arabella is leaving him. The divorce is going to be very public, very ugly. It could ruin the family name." "The family name," I repeated flatly. "The same family name that was so important you couldn't have me tarnishing it at Sebastian's engagement party." She had the grace to look ashamed. "Sophia, I know we made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You threw me out of my home on my birthday. You gave me a trash bag and $5,000 and told me I was a disappointment. You didn't call, didn't write, didn't check to see if I was even alive for 6 years. Those weren't mistakes, Mother. Those were choices." Tears were running down her face now. I know, and I'm sorry, if I could go back." "But you can't." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The same city where I'd lived in my car, where I'd showered in gym bathrooms, where I'd taught myself to code at public libraries because I had nowhere else to go. "You can't go back, and neither can I." "Please," she whispered. "Please, Sophia, he's your brother." "He was my twin," I said, turning to face her. "For 7 minutes in our mother's womb, we were equals, and then you spent the next 25 years making sure I knew I would never be his equal, that I would never be enough." "That's not—" "Tell me one thing," I interrupted. "In those 6 years since you kicked me out, did Sebastian ever ask about me? Did he ever try to find out if I was okay? Did he ever once show any concern for his twin sister?" Her silence was answer enough. "I think we're done here," I said quietly. "Sophia, please. I'll have my assistant show you out." She left crying. I watched her go, waiting for the guilt to hit, for the wave of regret and self-doubt that had always followed any confrontation with my family. But it never came. Instead, I felt something new: power. The power that comes from finally being in control of your own narrative. My mother had come to me because she needed something. For the first time in my life, I was the one who had something they wanted. And I was going to make them work for it. The next few weeks were illuminating. With my mother's visit as a catalyst, I finally started paying attention to what was happening with my family, and what I found was fascinating. Sebastian's golden life was falling apart. The investment decisions my mother had mentioned weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Sebastian had led the family firm into a series of high-risk ventures that had gone spectacularly wrong. The details were complex, but the bottom line was simple. Harrison Financial Group had lost over $200 million in the span of 18 months. And it got worse. Some of those losses weren't just bad luck or poor judgment. There were whispers of fraud, insider trading, financial manipulation. The SEC was investigating, and while no charges had been filed yet, the writing was on the wall. Meanwhile, Sebastian's perfect marriage was imploding publicly and dramatically. Arabella had discovered that her husband had been cheating on her for years, multiple affairs with multiple women, including one of her best friends. She'd hired the most expensive divorce attorney in the city and was going after everything: the houses, the cars, the investments, and half of whatever was left of Sebastian's stake in the family company. The tabloids were having a field day. "Golden Boy Tarnished, The Fall of Sebastian Harrison," screamed one headline. "Harrison Heir's Empire Crumbles as Wife Files for Divorce," announced another. "Financial Prodigy or Financial Fraud, SEC Investigates Harrison Investment Firm," proclaimed a third. I read these articles with a strange mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly, the sweet vindication of watching the favored child finally face consequences for his actions. But there was also something sadder, more complicated. We had shared a womb once. We had been equals once. Part of me mourned the brother I could have had if things had been different. But things hadn't been different, and Sebastian hadn't just been the beneficiary of our parents' favoritism. He had actively participated in it. He had watched me be humiliated, dismissed, and ultimately discarded, and he had done nothing. Worse than nothing, he had benefited from it. So while I mourned the brother I could have had, I felt nothing for the brother I actually had. The calls started coming more frequently after my mother's visit. First, it was distant relatives, aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly reaching out to reconnect. Their messages all had the same structure: warm greetings, fond memories of childhood, and pointed questions about my company's success. "We always knew you'd do great things, Sophia. Remember when you used to fix my computer at family dinners? Even then, we could tell you were special. The whole family is so proud of what you've accomplished." I ignored most of them, but I kept track, noting who reached out and what they wanted, creating a map of my family's desperation, watching as it grew more intense week by week. Then came the visit from Sebastian. He showed up at my office unannounced, just like our mother had. But unlike Victoria, Sebastian didn't wait to be escorted up. He pushed past my assistant, ignored the security guard who tried to stop him, and burst into my office like he still had the right to demand my attention. "Sophia," he said, slightly out of breath, "we need to talk." I looked up from my laptop calmly. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was a nervous energy about him that I'd never seen before. The confident, golden boy I'd grown up with was gone. In his place was someone desperate, diminished, afraid. "Hello, Sebastian," I said. "It's been a while." "6 years," he said, and then he had the audacity to add, "You could have called." I laughed, actually laughed. I could have called. You're the one who sat there eating your eggs Benedict while our parents threw me out of the house. You're the one who told me maybe I needed to figure things out on my own. You could have called, Sebastian. You could have texted. You could have sent a carrier pigeon. In 6 years, I didn't hear a single word from you. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was busy. The company, the wedding, everything. Right, too busy for your twin sister, I understand. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. Look, I didn't come here to fight. I came because I need your help. So I've heard. The company is in trouble, real trouble. We need capital and we need it fast or we're going to lose everything. He paused, his eyes searching my face for some sign of sympathy. You've built something amazing here, Sophia. I've been reading about your company. You're brilliant. You always were, even if I didn't see it. You saw it, I said quietly. You just didn't care. He flinched but pressed on. I know I wasn't a good brother. I know I let them treat you badly. But we're family, Sophia. Blood, that has to count for something. It counts, I agreed. It counts for exactly as much as you made it count when I needed you, which is nothing. Sophia. Do you know where I lived after you all threw me out? I interrupted. For the first 3 months, I lived in a car, a rusted-out Honda that I bought with the last of my money. I showered at gyms, ate dollar store food, and taught myself to code at public libraries because I couldn't afford internet access. Sebastian's face went pale. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, because you didn't ask, because you didn't care, because as far as you were concerned, I was exactly what our parents said I was, a disappointment, a failure, a waste of space. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed again. You want to talk about fair? Our parents gave you $2 million for your wedding, Sebastian. $2 million for a single party. Do you know what they gave me? A check for $5,000 and a deadline to get out of their house. He was silent. You got a Harvard education. I got told I wasn't university material. You got a position at the family company. I got told I had no skills, no connections, no value. You got a gilded life handed to you on a silver platter. I got a trash bag and a parking lot to sleep in. I know it wasn't equal. Equal, Sebastian, it was never even close to equal, but that's not what bothers me most. I stood up and walked around my desk, stopping a few feet from him. What bothers me most is that you watched all of it happen. You saw how they treated me every day for 25 years, and you never once stood up for me, not once. His eyes were wet now, whether from genuine emotion or calculated performance I couldn't tell. I should have, he said quietly, I know that now. I should have been a better brother. Yes, I agreed. You should have. So let me make it right. He stepped closer, his voice turning urgent. Invest in the company. Help me get through this investigation, and I'll make sure you have a seat at the table. Equal partners, Sophia. Everything I have, everything the family has, split down the middle. Just give me a chance to fix this. I studied his face for a long moment. The offer was tempting, I had to admit, not because I wanted what he was offering. I'd built my own empire, my own legacy, but because there was a part of me that still wanted to believe, still wanted to think that family could be redeemed, that 25 years of neglect and 6 years of abandonment could somehow be erased by one desperate plea. But I'd learned better than that. The answer is no, Sebastian. His face fell. Sophia, please. No, I won't invest in your company. I won't bail you out. I won't clean up the mess you've made of your life, the way I was always expected to clean up messes while you got the credit for the clean rooms. You don't understand. Without help, I'll lose everything. Then you'll have to figure things out on your own, I said, echoing his own words back to him. Maybe that will be good for you. Maybe you need to figure things out on your own for a while. His face contorted with sudden rage. You think you're so much better than me now. Just because you built some little app, you're still the same nobody you always were. You're still the disappointment, Sophia, the weird one, the one nobody wanted. I smiled. There he is. There's the real Sebastian. You owe me this. You owe our family. I don't owe you anything. My voice was calm, steady. I owe you nothing but what you gave me, indifference, and that's exactly what you're getting. You're going to regret this. He was backing toward the door now, his face red with fury. When everything comes out, when people see who you really are. Who I really am, I said quietly, is the woman who built an $8 million company from nothing while sleeping in her car. Who I really am is the sister who survived her family's cruelty and came out stronger. Who I really am is someone who doesn't need your approval, your acceptance, or your permission to succeed. I hit the intercom button on my desk. Security, please escort my brother out of the building. He won't be returning. Sebastian's mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something more, another threat, another plea, another attempt to manipulate. But then his shoulders slumped, and the fight went out of him. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. You know, he said quietly, we could have been allies. We could have been a team. We could have been, I agreed, but you chose sides a long time ago. You just didn't realize you were choosing wrong. He left without another word. After Sebastian's visit, things moved quickly. The SEC investigation intensified. Subpoenas were issued, documents were seized, and with each new revelation, the picture became clearer. Harrison Financial Group had been engaged in widespread fraud for years. Sebastian hadn't just made bad decisions. He'd been covering up those decisions with falsified records, misleading investors, and what appeared to be outright embezzlement. The charges came down 3 months after Sebastian left my office. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, the list went on. Sebastian was arrested at his home, the same mansion where he'd celebrated his $2 million engagement party, in front of news cameras and neighbors who recorded the whole thing on their phones. The footage went viral, the once golden Harrison heir being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. Arabella completed her divorce the same week. She took the houses, the cars, the remaining investments, and what was left of Sebastian's reputation. By the time she was done, he had nothing but debt and legal fees. And then there was the matter of my parents. In the wake of Sebastian's arrest, investigators began looking more closely at Harrison Financial Group's operations. What they found implicated not just Sebastian, but Richard Harrison himself. My father had known about the fraud, had participated in it, had used his position as CEO to facilitate the very crimes his son was being charged with. Richard Harrison was arrested 2 weeks after Sebastian. I watched the footage from my office, alone, in the same chair where I'd sat when my mother came begging for help, the same chair where I'd told Sebastian no. I watched as my father, the man who had called me a waste of space, who had handed me a check and told me to get out of his house, who had never once in my life told me he was proud of me, was led away in handcuffs, his face gray with shock. I waited for the satisfaction to hit, the vindication, the sweet, sweet revenge that 6 years of pain and struggle had earned me. But instead, I felt something unexpected, sadness. Not for them, they had made their choices and would face the consequences, but for the family we could have been, for the relationships we could have had, for the father who might have loved me if he'd ever bothered to try. I allowed myself to feel that sadness for exactly 15 minutes. Then I dried my eyes, straightened my clothes, and got back to work. The weeks after my father's arrest were chaotic. The family company collapsed almost overnight. Investors fled, clients disappeared, and the Harrison name, once synonymous with power and prestige, became a symbol of corruption and greed. Properties were seized, accounts were frozen. The empire my great-great-grandfather had built was dismantled piece by piece. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, my mother reached out again. This time she didn't come to my office. She couldn't. She'd had to sell the Lexus, along with everything else she could liquidate to pay legal fees. Instead, she called from a number I didn't recognize. "Sophia," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I have nowhere else to turn." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the end call button. I could hang up. I could block the number. I could do to her exactly what she'd done to me, cast her out and never look back. But something made me pause. "Where are you?" I asked. She was staying in a motel, not the kind of motel where I'd spent those first desperate weeks after leaving home. This one was worse, cheaper, the kind of place where people went when they had no other options. I found her sitting on the bed when I arrived, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The woman who had once commanded every room she entered, who had made me feel invisible with a single glance, was now hunched and broken, her expensive clothes replaced by thrift store finds. "Thank you for coming," she said, not looking at me. "I didn't think you would." I sat down in the room's single chair, plastic, cracked, the kind of chair I'd sat in 1,000 times during my years of struggling. Neither did I. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've been thinking a lot about you these past few weeks, about how we treated you, how we made you feel." I said nothing. "I told myself it was for your own good," she continued, her voice cracking, "that we were pushing you to be better, but that wasn't true. The truth is," she finally looked up at me, her eyes wet, "the truth is I didn't know how to love someone who wasn't perfect. And Sebastian was perfect, or at least I thought he was. He was easy to love. He did everything right. And you were difficult, complicated. You asked questions I didn't have answers to. You saw through things I didn't want to examine. So you pushed me away," I said quietly, "because loving me would have been too hard." Yes, the word came out like a confession. Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sophia, for everything. For the favoritism, for the neglect, for throwing you out of your home on your birthday, for making you think you weren't good enough, for letting you believe you were a disappointment. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation, the calculation, the angle, but all I saw was grief. Real, raw, overwhelming grief. "You can't undo the past," I said finally. "Those years are gone. The damage is done." "I know. But you can decide what happens next." I stood up, walking to the window. The view was of a parking lot and a dumpster, a far cry from the manicured gardens of the house I'd grown up in. I'm not going to pretend everything is forgiven. I'm not going to pretend that a few months of consequences erases 25 years of pain, but I'm also not going to let bitterness consume me. I've come too far for that. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice small. I turned to face her. "It means I'm going to help you, not because you deserve it, you don't. Not because I've forgiven you, I haven't. But because holding on to this anger is costing me energy I could be spending on something better. And because, somewhere underneath all the hurt, you're still my mother." She started crying then, not the elegant tears I'd seen at galas and dinner parties, but ugly, honest sobs that shook her whole body. I didn't comfort her. I wasn't ready for that yet, but I didn't leave either. "I'm going to set up an account for you," I said once she'd calmed down. "Enough to cover basic expenses, rent, food bills. It's not charity, it's not forgiveness. It's just humanity. The humanity you didn't show me when I needed it." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Sophia." "There are conditions," I continued. "First, you go to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where you pretend everything is fine. Second, you do not contact me unless I initiate it. I'll reach out when I'm ready, if I ever am. Third, you tell no one about this arrangement. Not Sebastian, not your friends, no one. If I find out you've used this to manipulate the situation, the support ends immediately." She nodded frantically. "Yes, yes, of course, whatever you need." I headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. I want you to understand something clearly. I'm not doing this because I need you. I'm not doing this because I want your approval or your love or your acceptance. I'm doing this because I refuse to become the kind of person you made me feel like I was. I'm better than that. I've always been better than that." I left her crying in that cheap motel room, her tears dripping onto the stained carpet. And I felt something I hadn't expected, lighter. My company continued to grow. By year 7, we had expanded to 3 countries, with offices in London and Singapore to complement our U.S. headquarters. By year 8, we were serving over 10,000 businesses worldwide. By year 9, we had secured a Series B funding round that valued the company at $90 million. And by year 10, 10 years after my family threw me out, Sophia Harrison had built something truly remarkable. The acquisition offer came from Tech Horizon, one of the largest software conglomerates in the world. Their CEO, Amanda Chen, flew in personally to make the pitch. "We've been watching your company for years," she said, sitting across from me in my corner office. "What you've built, the product, the customer loyalty, the team, it's exactly what we're looking for. We want to make you an offer." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening." $1.2 billion, she said. "Cash and stock mixed negotiable. You stay on as CEO of the division for at least 2 years. Full creative control. Whatever you need to say yes." $1.2 billion. I let the number sink in, tried to imagine what it would feel like to have that kind of money, more money than my parents had ever dreamed of, more than the entire Harrison financial group had been worth at its peak. But that wasn't what made me smile. What made me smile was realizing that I'd done exactly what I promised I would do. I'd built something so big, so undeniable, that no one, not even my family, could dismiss me anymore. I looked at Amanda Chen and said, "I'll need some time to think about it." She smiled. "Of course, take whatever time you need." I didn't accept the offer right away. First, I needed to do something I'd been planning for months, ever since I realized just how far I'd come. The property came up for sale quietly, just another casualty of the Harrison family's collapse. Their house, the one I'd grown up in, was being sold to pay off legal debts and fines. It was on the market for a fraction of what it was worth, and there were no shortage of buyers interested in snapping up a piece of fallen dynasty. But none of them moved fast enough. I bought it through a shell company, making sure my name didn't appear anywhere on the paperwork. The sale went through in 3 days, cash, no contingencies, and just like that, the house where I'd been treated like an afterthought, where I'd been told I was wasting space, where I'd been handed a trash bag and told to leave, was mine. I didn't do anything with it at first, just let it sit there, empty and waiting, while I figured out what I wanted it to mean. And then one afternoon, I got an unexpected visitor. Sebastian was out on bail, awaiting trial. He'd been stripped of everything: his money, his reputation, his future. The golden boy had tarnished beyond repair, and everyone who'd once praised him was now scrambling to distance themselves. He showed up at my office again, but this time he waited in the lobby like everyone else. When I finally agreed to see him, he walked in slowly, all the swagger gone from his step. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said quietly, sitting down across from my desk. "I know I don't deserve it." I studied him. He looked older than 35. The stress and shame had aged him considerably. His clothes were cheap now, his hair unkempt, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd lost everything and knew it was his own fault. "What do you want, Sebastian?" He laughed bitterly. "I don't know anymore. I used to think I knew exactly what I wanted. Money, power, success. The things Dad always said mattered. But it turns out none of that was real. It was all built on lies. Our whole family was built on lies." I waited. "I've had a lot of time to think," he continued, "about how we treated you, about how I treated you, about all the times I could have been a real brother and chose not to be." He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I know that doesn't change anything. I know it's too little, too late, but I needed to say it." I considered his words carefully. "Do you remember our 5th birthday?" I asked. He blinked, thrown by the question. "What?" "Our 5th birthday. Mom and Dad threw us a party at that big park downtown. You got a brand new bicycle, the red one you'd been asking for, and I paused. "Do you remember what I got?" He shook his head slowly. "A book," I said, "a used book from the second-hand store. Mom had already bought your bicycle, and I think she forgot about me until the last minute. Dad made some joke about how I was the smart twin and didn't need expensive toys." Sebastian's face crumbled. I didn't remember that." "I know, because you never had to remember. You never had to notice the difference, because the difference always worked in your favor." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city I'd conquered. "Every birthday, every holiday, every single day of our childhood, you got more. more attention, more praise, more love, and I got the scraps, the leftovers, the "oh, we should probably acknowledge Sophia too" afterthoughts. I didn't know. You knew. I turned to face him. You knew, Sebastian, you just didn't care, because why would you? You were the golden child, you had everything. What did it matter to you if your sister was invisible? He was crying now, real tears, messy and unglamorous. I should have cared. I should have seen what they were doing to you. I should have been your brother. Yes, you should have. I sat back down, letting the silence stretch between us. But you weren't, and now we're here. So what happens now? He asked, his voice cracking. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I'd lost, everything I'd gained. Now, I said finally, you face the consequences of your choices, just like I faced the consequences of choices I never even made. The difference is, I didn't have a billion-dollar company to help me survive. I had a trash bag and a car, so forgive me if I'm not particularly sympathetic to your situation. I know I deserve that. You deserve a lot of things, Sebastian, most of them worse than what you're going to get. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over, but I'm not going to be the one to deliver them. I'm not going to spend my energy on revenge. I've got better things to do with my life. He stood slowly, looking at me with something that might have been respect. You're different than I remember, stronger. I was always strong, I said. You just never bothered to notice. Sebastian went to trial a month later. The evidence was overwhelming. His own records, his own emails, his own decisions, all laid bare for the world to see. He pled guilty to most of the charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he still got 8 years in federal prison. My father got 12. I watched the sentencing on TV, alone in my apartment with a glass of wine and a heart that felt surprisingly calm. The man who had called me a waste of space, who had handed me my walking papers on my 25th birthday, who had never once in my life told me he loved me, was going to prison for more than a decade. And somehow, that fact didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd always imagined it would. What it brought instead was closure. The story was finally over. The power imbalance that had defined my entire life had been reversed, corrected, balanced. I was the successful one now. I was the one who had built something real. And they were the ones who had lost everything. A year after my father's sentencing, I finally accepted the acquisition offer. Tech Horizon paid $1.4 billion, $200 million more than the original offer, thanks to 18 months of continued growth. I stayed on as divisional CEO for 2 years, then transitioned to an advisory role that let me work on my own terms. At 45 years old, I was one of the richest women in America. But that wasn't what mattered to me. What mattered was what I did with the house. The Harrison estate, my childhood home, the place where I'd been made to feel worthless for 25 years, had been sitting empty since I bought it. I'd been waiting for the right moment, the right purpose. And then I found it. I turned it into a shelter. Not just any shelter, a comprehensive support center for young people who'd been thrown out of their homes, kids whose families had rejected them for being gay, for being trans, for being different, kids who'd been told they were disappointments, failures, wastes of space. Kids like me. The renovation took 2 years and cost $10 million. When it was done, the Harrison House, as we called it, had beds for 50 residents, job training programs, mental health services, and educational support. We hired the best staff, created the strongest programs, and opened the doors to anyone who needed a place to belong. The grand opening was covered by every major news outlet in the country. I gave interviews, posed for photos, and explained why this project mattered so much to me. I was thrown out of this house when I was 25, I told the cameras. I was told I was a disappointment, a failure, a waste of space. I spent months living in my car, wondering if my family was right about me. I paused, looking up at the building that had once been my prison. But they weren't right, and I want every young person who comes through these doors to know that they're not a disappointment. They're not a failure. They're not a waste of space. They're exactly who they're supposed to be, and they have just as much potential as anyone else, even if their families can't see it. The applause was thunderous, but I wasn't paying attention to that. I was paying attention to the small group of teenagers gathered at the edge of the crowd, kids who'd already been through our intake process, who'd already been given beds and hot meals and the promise of a future. Kids who looked at me like I'd given them hope. That was worth more than any billion-dollar acquisition. A few months after the opening, I got a letter. It came from the federal prison where my father was serving his sentence. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, nothing like the confident script I remembered from my childhood. Sophia, I've been watching the news. I saw what you did with the house, Harrison House, a shelter for kids who have been thrown away by their families. I know what you're saying. I know the message you're sending. I've had a lot of time to think in here, a lot of time to remember things I'd rather forget, the way I treated you, the things I said, the way I made you feel like you didn't matter. You mattered, you always mattered. I was just too proud and too stupid to see it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I wouldn't believe you if you offered it, but I wanted you to know that I see now. I see what you built. I see who you are. You're not a disappointment, Sophia. You never were. I'm the disappointment. Your father. I read the letter 3 times, waiting for the anger to rise, waiting for the old wounds to reopen. But they didn't. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected, pity, for the man who'd had everything and threw it all away, for the father who could have loved me and chose not to, for the person who was finally seeing clearly, but only after it was far too late. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing left to say. But I also didn't throw it away. Part 6, The Reunion. 5 years passed. Harrison House flourished, growing into a network of 12 facilities across the country. We'd helped over 3,000 young people find their footing, rebuild their lives, and discover their potential. Some had gone on to college. Some had started businesses. Some had simply found peace, the peace that comes from knowing you're not alone. I'd stepped back from Tech Horizon entirely, focusing instead on the foundation I'd created to support Harrison House and similar programs. My life was full, not with wealth or power, but with purpose. And then one autumn afternoon, my mother called. Sophia, she said, her voice thin and weary, your father is dying. He'd been diagnosed with cancer 6 months earlier. The prison had provided some treatment, but it was too late. He had weeks left, maybe less. I thought you should know, she continued. In case you wanted to, I don't know, say goodbye. I was quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, I said finally. I thought about it for 3 days. 3 days of wrestling with memories, with anger, with grief. 3 days of asking myself what I wanted, what I needed, what closure might look like. In the end, I decided to go. The prison hospital was stark and sterile. My father lay in a narrow bed, surrounded by machines that beat the heart. He looked like a skeleton, 90 pounds at most.
जिसका एम सबसे पहले माथे पे जाएगा वही जीतेगा बेंच मतलब वही जीत जाएगा ये जिंदा रहेगा कम से कम भाई वहां पे तो चलो चारों बंदों को भी अगर हेड मार दे तो अच्छा रहता है मतलब खींचेंगे तो एम लग जाएगा क्यों क्या हो गया
I didn't think you would.
क्या हो गया
Neither did I.
अरे लास्ट खेले चलो लास्ट खेले और एक पे चले जाएंगे
The machines beat. Outside, the guard walked past. I'm sorry, he said finally. The words coming out.
नहीं है बस क्यों भाई क्या हो गया खेल ले अच्छा ही खेल रहा है तू
for making you feel like
खेल ले
you
साले
enough.
जा मत
I looked at him, really looked at him. At the man who had shaped so much of my life.
खाना लेके आ
12 बजे 12:30
who had given me my
खाना
deepest
लेके आ जाना
wounds,
फिर
inadvertently, my greatest strengths.
वो तो है अब तो 30 हो गया
I know you're sorry, I said quietly.
खाना लेके बैठ जाना मतलब
letter. Then do you forgive me? I considered
मैं भी
the
बीजीएम में
question
बहुत टाइम के बाद
carefully.
फिर खेला
I don't know.
मस्त लगा था मेरे को लेकिन पहले पहले जैसा नहीं आ रहा फील उसमें भी यार
Like you can
फ्री
just
फायर तो
decide to
हक हो
let
गया
go of
एकदम गू हो
decades
गया
of
फ्री
pain
फायर
because someone
बाकी
finally
पबजी में भी यार
apologizes.
बहुत
It's not
बकचोदी कर
that
रहे हैं लोग
simple.
बयान जो
He
कुछ भी ला
nodded,
दे रहे
his
हैं भाई
eyes glistening. I understand.
एक
But I
बार
will
तो
say
लाया था ना
this, I
गोरिल्ला
continued. I'm not
भोसड़ी का
angry. The anger burned out
कुछ
a
भी ला
long
रहे
time
भाई
ago. What I feel now is mostly just sad.
ये लोग पता है
Sad
सोच
for
रहे
what
हैं कि
we
बहन
could
जो
have
जितने
had.
सारे
Sad for the
चीजें हो सके
father-daughter
गेम में डाल दो
relationship we
बहन
never got to
गान
have.
मराए बंदे
Sad for all
डाल
the
दो जो हो
years we
सके
wasted on
एक
pride
के
and
बाद एक डाल
resentment.
दे बंदे
Tears were running down his face now,
पहले ही सही
pooling
था
in
वे
the hollows of his cheeks.
ये लोग खुद की
I'm
गेम
sad
की
too,
मतलब
he
बैंड
whispered.
बजा रहे पूरा
Every day, sad for what I did to you, sad for the person I could have
पैसा
been.
चाहिए इनको और क्या
I reached out and took his hand.
गेम
It
नहीं
was
सही
the
कर
first
रहे हैं
time
उल्टा
I
स्किन
touched him
स्किन
voluntarily
स्किन
since I was a child.
लगाए
We
पड़े
can't change the past, I said, but maybe we can make peace with it for whatever time you have left.
अरे पुराने बंदे जो थे फ्री
He
फायर
gripped
में
my
तो चले ही गए
hand
भाई
with
छोड़ दिए
surprising
बंदों ने गेम
strength. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that
कोई
very
चाहिए
much.
बनवा दो
I visited him 4 more times before he died.
तुम्हारी बनवाते हैं हम तेरी
Each visit was
अभी मैं एक
different.
बात बोल
Sometimes we
दूंगा तो
talked
अभी
about my
गेम से चला
childhood,
जाएगा
about the
इसलिए मैं
moments
नहीं
he
बोलूंगा
remembered wrong and the moments he didn't remember at all. Sometimes we talked about my company, about Harrison House, about the person I'd become. Sometimes we
लेकिन
भाई
just
ये
sat
ऐसा
in
नाम
silence,
रखेगा ना
holding
तो
hands,
कोई नहीं
letting the
आएगा।
weight of pain
वही मैं
slowly
बोलने जा रहा था
dissolve. He died on a Tuesday afternoon in October.
ऐसा नाम रखा
I
है
was
लड़की
holding his
पहले बार
hand when
पड़ेगी
he
सीधा
took his
ब्लॉक
last
मार देगी
breath.
मैं जो बोले इसके साथ
The
तो नहीं खेल
funeral
रहा
was
मैं
small and quiet.
कुछ भी हो
There were no society pages
चेंज कैसे
covering
करते
it,
हैं
no
ये तो मुझे
influential
भी नहीं
families
पता
paying respects.
अच्छा
Just me,
वेबसाइट
my
वेबसाइट पे
mother,
जाना
and a handful
अच्छा
of former colleagues who
हाँ
remained
रियोट क्लाइंट
loyal
से करेंगे ना
despite
शायद से
everything. Sebastian
रियोट से
didn't come. He was still
नहीं
in
हो रहा
prison, serving out the remainder of his
अच्छा
sentence.
90 डेज में चेंज होता है क्या
After the service, my mother and I stood alone by the grave. Thank you, she
मतलब
said
हर 90
quietly,
डेज के
for
बाद चेंज
being
कर
there
सकते
at
हैं
the
ऐसा है
end, for giving him the chance to make amends. I didn't
एक
do it
बार
for
हाँ वही
him,
तो
I
बोल रहा हूँ
said.
सही है
I did it for me, so I could let go. She nodded,
अरे जो रियोट क्लाइंट
understanding.
ना जिसे हम लोग खोलते हैं
And
मतलब
now,
उसी पे
she
बोल रहा है ये
asked, what happens
उसी के
now?
अंदर कर
I looked out at the cemetery, at the rows of headstones, at the bare trees, at the gray autumn sky.
राइट
Now, I
हैंड
said, we
तुम
move
लोग
forward,
के
not
लेफ्ट में
forgetting
कहाँ
what
पे
happened, but not letting it define us either. Just forward.
रुक रुक कहाँ पे बोल रहा राइट
She took my
हैंडेड
hand
हो
and
तुम
squeezed it
लोग या
gently.
लेफ्ट अबे राइट हैंडेड है बे साले
Forward, she agreed.
क्या लिख रहा है सोनिक तू
Part 7, The Legacy.
नहीं ये पूछ रहा हूँ राइट
Sebastian was
हैंडेड हो कि
released
लेफ्ट
from
हैंडेड।
prison when he
अरे
was
उसमें
42.
पर्सन
I
व्यू
didn't
में
go to meet him. We hadn't
मतलब राइट में
spoken
तुम्हारी
since
गन
that day in
पकड़ाती
my
है
office, years before his sentencing. I wasn't sure
समझा
we'd
नहीं मैं
ever
तेरी
meet
बात
again.
फिर भी
But one
गन तू
morning,
राइट साइड
about
से
6
पकड़ता
months
है कि
after
लेफ्ट
his
साइड से
release,
तेरा
I got a
कैरेक्टर?
phone call from an unfamiliar number.
ये तो मुझे देखना पड़ेगा मैं भूल
Sophia,
गया
his
हूँ
voice was softer than I remembered,
हाँ
tentative.
लेफ्ट से ही
डायरेक्ट
पकड़ता है मेरे
लेफ्ट
हिसाब से
लेफ्ट
तो यार लेफ्ट से ही
I
पकड़ता है हर
wasn't
कोई
sure he'd
नहीं
answer.
डिफॉल्ट में
I
राइट रहता
almost
है
didn't.
लेफ्ट करना
अच्छा
पड़ता है।
There was a long pause. I could hear
तो
him
फिर तो मेरा
breathing,
राइट
could
पकड़ेगा
hear
शायद
the
से पता
nervousness
नहीं
in each inhale. I've been to Harrison House,
डिफॉल्ट
he
राइट है
said
अच्छा
finally. The one downtown. I drove by it a few
अरे
times,
तो
worked
क्यों
up the
मैच क्यों
courage
काट
to go
दिया
in. I hadn't known that. The staff hadn't
बे
mentioned
सालो
anything.
लिख रहा था ना इसलिए।
I talked to some of the kids there, he continued.
वो यूजर
Heard their
नेम बदल
stories
रहा है
about
लो
how they'd been thrown out by their
हाँ, अबे
families,
तू बता
told
दियो
they
भाई
weren't
वरना
good
मैं
enough,
पहचान नहीं
made to
पाऊंगा तेरे
feel
को
like they didn't
अरे तो
कौन
तू
सा नाम
वेबसाइट से बदलेगा ना
His
वेबसाइट
voice
से बदलेगा ना तो गेम से डाल
They reminded me of you, Sophia.
वही तो अभी
The
तो
way
गेम
you
चालू
must
कर
have
दे
felt when
क्या भी बदल रहा है क्या अबे लड़की बहन अभी चाहिए तेरे को क्या
No,
अरे
let
तो
me
अभी
say this,
बदलता रहे
please.
ना वो
He took
क्या
a
बोलते
deep
गेम
breath.
को
I was a
मिनिमाइज करके
terrible brother. I was complicit in every terrible
वेबसाइट
thing
में
your
वही
parents
तो
did to you.
अरे
I
रहने दे
watched
यार
them tear
लड़की
you
मत पटा
down
भाई
and I
तू
said
रहने दे
nothing.
भोसड़ी का
I
यही
benefited
नाम
from your
ठीक है
pain
मत
and I
कर
never
चेंज
once questioned it. That's unforgivable.
मत कर
I was
चेंज लाला मत
quiet,
कर
letting him speak.
ना करे
But I
जनाब आप
want to
ना
do
करे
better, he said. I want to try at least. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to
ना
be
करे
friends
जनाब
or even
हम
family.
आप
But I
आप
want to
जो
do
है
something useful with whatever time I have left. I want to help. Help how? Harrison House, the foundation, whatever you need. He paused. I don't have
क्या हो
money.
गया
I lost everything. But I have time.
अभी
And I have
बनेगी
stories.
जीए
Stories about what
ये
it's like
चेंज
to
कर
have
लेगा इसने
everything and lose it all. About how privilege blinds you to the suffering of others. About the cost of
ये नाम
believing
लिख
you're
ले
better than
ज्यादा
everyone
सही
else.
रहेगा।
I considered his offer.
Match found.
Part of
चलो
me wanted
फाइनली
to
मैच
refuse,
लगा
to protect the sanctuary I'd built from the
कितना
very
टाइम लगा बे
person
डेथ
who
मैच
helped
लगने में यार
destroy
इतना
my
टाइम लग लिया
childhood, to keep him
क्या
far
हो रहा
away
है
from the kids who reminded him of me. But another part of me remembered something my grandmother had told me years before she
जोड़
died.
का
The
झटका
only way to
है
break a cycle,
जोड़ों
she'd
से
said,
लगा
is to
Take a
let someone else
seat.
try
I
it
got
before
this.
them. There's a training program
इस
for
बार तुरंत ले लिया
mentors, I
इसने
said
नियॉन
finally.
सोच रहा है
It's
वेंचर
intensive. 6 months of work before you can even interact with the residents. Background checks, psychological evaluations, the whole thing. I'll do it. It won't be easy. The kids there have been through a
पता है
lot.
मैं
They don't
स्टार्टिंग में
trust
इतना बेंच
easily.
ऑनरेटेड खेला हूँ मुझे लगता
Neither did you.
तब लगता था मेरे को कि यही
I
रैंक है यही
couldn't
सब कुछ है
argue with that.
इसमें
If
महलों
you're
पे
serious, I said,
फिर मुझे बंदों
contact
ने
the
बताया कि
volunteer
बेंच रैंक भी होता है
coordinator. Tell them I
मतलब
sent
कॉम्प
you.
होता है अलग
They'll
से
take it from there.
ये
मैं भी अनरेटेड
Thank
पहले
you,
बहुत खेलता था।
Sophia.
एक
Thank
महीना
you
तो
for
पूरा
giving me a
अनरेटेड ही
अबे
chance.
मैं तो 25 लेवल
Don't
तक
thank me
अनरेटेड ही
yet,
खेला हूँ
I
सिर्फ और
said.
सिर्फ
Prove me
उसके
right for
बाद से मैं
taking
खेलने
it.
लगा रैंक
Sebastian
मतलब
completed the
कॉम्प
training
क्या बोलूं
program.
भाई
Then he completed his first
कॉम्प
year
20
as
के
a
बाद ही
mentor,
अनलॉक होता है
then his second.
किसके बाद
I watched
20
the
के बाद
assistants getting
अरे मैं
reports
भाई
from
25 तक
staff,
खेला हूँ ना
reading the
100
anonymous feedback from
मैं खेला
residents
ही
who
नहीं 20
worked
के
there.
बाद
The responses were surprisingly positive. Kids talked about
Reloading.
how he shared his own
Reloading.
story.
चला
There was one child who
Reloading.
believed his own hype. He lost
Go, go,
everything
go.
because he'd never learned to see beyond himself.
Reloading.
जब पता है जब मेरे को चटाई मिला था ना तब चटाई का गेम प्ले अच्छा था मैं चूतिया था मेरा गेम प्ले ठीक है अब इसका गेम प्ले टट्टी हो रहा है धीरे धीरे मैं देख रहा हूँ
started talking again, slowly, cautiously. First about the work, then about other things. Books we'd read, places we'd
One tap. अरे भाई कौन से मार रहा है बे?
about our childhood.
अच्छा बेटे ये बात है.
Always there, underneath everything.
Frenzy.
Foundation in which our new relationship was built.
ले भाई ले.
On my 50th birthday, I got a card. Not enough. It was from Sebastian. A simple design, nothing fancy. Inside, destabilizing. Sophia. 50 years ago, he entered this world 7 minutes after me. For most of our lives, I thought those 7 minutes meant something. That being first made me more important, more valuable, and more worthy of love. I was wrong. Embarrassing. You are the most important, most valuable, most worthy person I've ever known. Not because of what you've achieved, though that's remarkable. Because you took every terrible thing and used it to help others. Because you could have become bitter and vengeful, but you chose kindness instead. I'm proud to be your brother, even if I wasn't always worthy of the title. Happy birthday, Saul. Here's to the last 50 years. Sebastian. I read the card 6 times, then put it in the drawer with my grandmother's photos. Some wounds never fully heal, but sometimes they become something else. Not scars exactly like markers. Reminders of where you've been and how far you've come. I looked out the window of my penthouse apartment. The one I bought with the same ocean where I once lived in. Epilogue piece. I'm Gray is finally winning the battle against my hairline, and my knees protest every moment when I get out. But I'm here, still standing, still breathing. Harrison House has 24 locations spread across the country. Helped over 15,000 men find their way. Shows no signs of slowing down. It's run by brilliant people who will carry it forward long.
Yikes.
Sebastian is still involved. He became the director of our Western region 3 years ago, and he's good at it, better than I would have expected. The golden child finally found something worth doing. My mother passed away last week. We built something resembling a real relationship in her final years. Not close, not completely healed, but genuine. Real. At her funeral, I told stories about who she'd been at the end, the volunteer work she did, the apologies she'd finally learned to make.
buggy
Grandmother she'd come to kids at Harrison
Bulldog
House,
gun
who knew her only as Miss Kind who brought puppies every day. Some people can change. It takes time and pain and the willingness to see yourself, but it's possible. I still think about that morning sometimes. The 26th birthday, the trash bag, checked, the cold certainty in my father's voice when he told me I was wasting space. I think about how close it came to believing, how many nights I spent in that Honda, one right away, how much energy I wasted trying to prove my worth. But then I think about what came after, the struggle, the growth, the discovery of who I really was, underneath all the expectations and judgments and inherited shame. I think about Harrison House, about the kids who walk through those doors broken and leave whole, about the cycle of pain and breaking, one person at a time. And I think about something I read once, a long time ago. The best revenge is a life well lived. I didn't set out for revenge. I set out to survive. But somewhere along the way, final stage. Last week, I went back to visit the original Harrison House, the one that used to be my parents' estate. I walked through the rooms where I'd once felt invisible, now filled with young studying, dreaming. In the hallway, I stopped in front of the building. There's a picture of the surrounded by staff and residents, smiling like I'd finally found my place.
You should run.
A teenage girl walked up beside me, looking at the ceiling. Yeah, I said, that was me. She studied the image for a moment. You look happy. I was. She nodded thoughtfully. Then I asked her something. Of course. How did you do it? She turned to face me, her eyes serious. How did you go from where you were? I considered the question. The same question I asked myself 1,000 times. The same question every struggling person asks, late at night, when hope feels impossible to far away. One step at a time, I said. That's the honest answer. There was no magic moment, no sudden transformation. Just one step, then another, until eventually I looked back and realized how far I'd come. She absorbed.
Come on, let's go!
But what if you trip? She asked. What if you fall?
That's done.
Then you get up, I said simply, and you take another step.
Dead!
She smiled, a small, tentative smile that reminded me of myself at her age. Okay, she said, I can do that.
Triple, baby!
I know you can, I said. That's why you're here. She walked away, disappearing into the building that had once been my prison and was now a place of peace. I stood there for a long moment, watching her go. Then I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped back out into the sunlight. The ocean was sparkling in the distance, the same ocean I'd stared at from my car window, hungry and scared. But I wasn't scared anymore. And I wasn't alone. I never had been really. I just needed to find my people, my purpose, myself. It took a while. It cost me everything I thought I wanted. It gave me something better. True peace, the kind that comes from finally being exactly who you're supposed to be. I walked to my car, not a rusted Honda anymore, but something comfortable and reliable, and drove home. Behind me, Harrison House stood tall against the sky, a monument to second chances, a reminder that no one deserves space, especially not me.